All right, welcome everybody. My name is Rafael Garcia. I spoke earlier this morning. I have the great privilege to introduce you three great innovators in the field of green infrastructure. First, we're going to hear from Sacha Cole, and then Michael T, and then Patrick Blanc. We're going to hear three different case studies of some of the latest work they're going to be doing. If you have any questions, we're going to have a microphone at the end. And let me begin. We're running a little late, so if you could come up.
Thanks, Raphael, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. We're on. Okay, what you're going to see is a kind of a highly visual presentation of a range of projects, and I'm going to focus on, as the title says here, the Sydney scene, really a kind of a local transect of a range of design projects, but green infrastructure projects essentially. I'm Sacha Cole. I'm a director of a landscape architecture and urban design practice called Aspect Studios. Very quickly, we're about 100 people. We have offices around Australia, Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, where I'm based, and also Shanghai. As this says here, we're obsessed with design, being landscape architects, of course, but we're also deeply focused in producing sustainable places. Green infrastructure, essentially a topic of today, is something that we define, and as many of you would equally, as a practice of interrelated elements, which have interrelated benefits if they're done correctly. The pieces that we have influence over are those that are on the screen now, and this little diagram really is about the way we talk about green infrastructure, from roofs to walls to the creation of urban forestry, integrated water management, green streets and water-sensitive urban design. And I guess the perfect storm is when all of these things come together. This talk is going to focus on a series of projects. They're not all from our office. They're from a range of my contemporaries, landscape architects. They're all design projects. And they mainly focus around that 10-kilometre zone that you can see up there. This is a map of Sydney. The first circle is 5 Ks and the second one 10 as you go. And you'll see that these little dots here are places of interest. They're the projects I'm going to talk to. Sydney, of course, as many of you would know, is best known for its kind of spectacle landscape, its Keynote, its sort of postcard places. This is, of course, highly relevant, but today we're going to talk about some other benchmarks and innovative projects which perhaps haven't been talked about so much but are garnering huge international focus. Over the past 5 years or so, there's been a huge investment in particularly waterfront spaces around Sydney and the uplift of those waterfront parks. Over and above the kind of design excellence of each one of these individual projects, there's been a sort of a greater outcome, which is the creation of a large 14-kilometre publicly accessible green open space on the crust of the harbour. This has been done through a range of agencies, local, state and even federal, and it's a significant asset which is now actually coming to fruition, and it will benefit us socially, obviously environmentally, recreationally, and now we're seeing economically as well, with this being used as a sort of a tourist draw card as well. I'm going to present two projects which come out of that recent canon, Pyramid Park being one of ours, which is located at the end of one of the high streets in Sydney, in Piermont. What's interesting about this project, it came out of a sort of community protest where the local community saw an opportunity to rally up and stop development on a very prominent and beautiful harbour foreshore site. It's about 1.8 hectares. It offers a really rich experience at the water's edge, and it brings people down to the water. It has some pretty serious environmental credentials. It's a filter for a catchment-wide water reserve of the area. It basically took a piece of flat concrete, which you'll see in a moment, and which was completely denuded, a post-industrial site used for a range of different industries over time, and created a green park with a very strong green credential to its centre. You can see here in this image that actually a quarter of the whole site was excavated to enable people to come down and connect with the seawater. This is an image here of what the site was when we inherited it, and you can see the after shot below it. So beyond the obvious benefits of creating green space in a city of 1.8 hectares, there are over 150 new trees, which are, many of which are local to the area. There's a whole creation of an understory of shrub planting for biodiversity. But it's really the water credentials of this project which elevate it in our minds. So there's a 500,000 litre tank which has caught all of the water from the catchment around, and the central swale in the middle, which you can see actually down through here, is really the main device to treat, clean, and then store the water in the large tank beyond. These are just some detail images. It's a highly permeable site, and there's play as well, which has been integrated into the fabric, into the master plan of this, bringing kids into contact with very elemental design, reclaimed sandstone and water play. All the materials are very much in keeping with the post-industrial nature of the site. Another project, which is by some of our contemporaries, McGregor Coxall, landscape architects from Sydney, is in Balmain. This is a incredibly sublime project, which again is a headland project in Sydney Harbour in Balmain. This was a former oil site, petrol site, storage area, and in fact the whole project has excavated the site back to its bedrock, to its sandstone. What's incredible about this project, I think, is its innovative use of on-site materials. Most of the material that was excavated and used in this project has been kept on site, and you can see in that sort of headland, that sculpted terrace there, this is all reclaimed gabion walls from stone from the site. The significant credentials are listed here. It's about a 3-hectare park. It really exploits that idea of reuse and repurposing in a very graphic and a very tactile way. They manage stormwater very successfully, and again in a very transparent way on the site. And they've used design, I think, very deftly to illustrate what's been left of the industrial fabric of the site. And just some of these images just give you a flavour of the way they've manipulated and used design to actually talk about sustainability. In this case, the wetlands and the large sort of lily pad ponds of turf which connect through and beyond into the harbour. One of the most striking features of the park, I think, is the repurposed old storage unit, which has now got 8 wind turbines on it and powers the park, electricity, barbecues, lights, and the like. So very visible sustainability initiatives. So as with Pyramid Park, it's a very rare opportunity to transform this kind of large tract of open space. In more recent times, there's been a kind of a re-look at the city fabric itself, so back inboard. And principally the City of Sydney Council have been the main agency who've driven this. And what we're seeing is a greater push for sustainability in terms of transport, a huge emphasis on walking and cycling, public transport. Many of you would know that Sydney is destined to have a light rail which will go from Circular Quay up its main spine, George Street, and out to the south past the university. This will be a huge bonus for Sydney in terms of sustainable transport. But one of the other projects which, again, been designed by our contemporaries, JMD Design with Tonkin Zuleika Architects, is an extremely unique project in a high street in Sydney on Oxford Street. The Paddington Reservoir Gardens is, again, a post-industrial site which has been kind of deftly repurposed. It's a bit of an oasis in the city, and beyond the kind of engineered credentials of this one, it's the way the project has been, in a way, curated and left. It's archival materials on display. It's an old reservoir for water down through here and an old petrol station which had collapsed, and that brought the opportunity for the creation of a new urban park which sits actually below the surface of Oxford Street in this case. The key credentials again of this one are its adaptation of the existing structure, its harvesting and reuse of site water, and again its reuse of the robust material which has stood the test of time already and which is there in situ. It's an incredibly cool place. When you descend down off the street, down into the gardens, the temperature drops. They've used water very intelligently, both as a cooling mechanism through the irrigation, but also as a kind of a feature within the garden. And these images here start to talk about the quality of that space. What I'm trying to do is to illustrate a broad cross-section of investment in the public domain, and many of these projects, all designed by landscape architects, have embedded green infrastructure through them. One of our more recent projects, again within the city, as you can see here, is Darling Quarter, and this is in the very south eastern edge of Darling Harbour, which is probably one of the most visited places in Australia. It's a place-making project, we talk about it, and it's about a 1.5 hectare part of the city. The main credentials, I think, for this one, or the main positives for it, I suppose, have been that it's reconnected the city to Darling Harbour, where previously there was a large blockage. Now new pedestrian connections and bridges allow people to come straight down into Darling Harbour. There's the master plan there, and the new connections are really up through here, up to Town Hall, and back up to Liverpool Street and Chinatown. It's created more than just a sort of a headquarters, which is what these two buildings are here, are the headquarters for a large bank. They are heavy-hitting sustainability buildings in their own right, 6-star commercial buildings, and they've been highly awarded for their design and their achievements. But it's the greater precinctual design, I think, which has really given this project its credentials. The developers, in this case, have teamed up with the government. It was a PPP project, and designed not only a play space of close to half a hectare, but also the 1.5 hectare precinctual grounds around these buildings. The key things are really down the bottom there. The green roofs on top of both buildings are substantial, and they obviously take the first flush of water. All that water is captured, brought down into the public realm, stored and used for irrigation. We had to use a separate water source for the children's play, which I'll show you in a moment. But there are green roofs which are accessible and for use of those 4,500 people who are in those buildings. A whole new ecology has really, in a very simple way, has been enabled down through here with all mature planting coming into this site. There was really no tree planting down here. We've used that for shade and for amenity. But the key thing here is, again, the social infrastructure. At the centrepiece of the project is a large play space which has been designed to engender children to work together and socialise and learn through play. And this is one of the most activated and busiest places in Sydney if you go down on a sunny weekend, which I recommend you do if you're from out of town. So just some images here. You can see the buildings in the background. It's about 160 metres long, the facade of this building. It's actually looks like 2 buildings. It's actually 4 buildings with a large light-filled atrium in the middle. And on top of that building are the roof terraces, which look out to the west of Sydney. And they're trialling a range of food, plants, a bit of urban agriculture on these roofs here to see what will survive and what will thrive. Some of these images here also worth talking about the sort of the social agenda of this project, which is fantastic in that it caters for a range of groups. There are deck chairs, there are rugs, there are music and exhibitions which are curated throughout the year here, and all of this is free to anyone who wants to come down. It's a wireless-enabled environment as well. The key thing, I think, for Darling Quarter has been the return on investment for the developer in this case and the government, which is more than just an economic one. There's retail down the bottom, which is thriving, which is fantastic for any project, but it's the health and well-being metrics, I think, that have really been so high on the charts and been such a great outcome of that project. Very quickly, to sort of cap this part of the presentation off, I'm going to show 2 projects which again are more fine-grained, more granular projects in the city. And I'm showing them because of the investment that the City of Sydney principally is giving towards creating a more sustainable city for people, for walking and for cycling principally. The first one is in Chinatown, and it's, as you can see, the site we inherited was a series of pretty degraded laneways, serviceways for cars only. The role there was to not only transform them into a new network for walking, but also to create the armature or the placemaking for significant public artworks. This one here by a local artist, both Aboriginal and Chinese, Jason Wing, is a particularly beautiful example which takes the walls, the ground plane and the sky plane. In the other area, Little Hay Street that we dealt with, you'll start to see the upgrade in materials, not only create a more high quality environment, but also broaden the footpaths, create less space for vehicles, which I think was a very difficult but courageous thing to do in an incredibly busy place like this in Sydney, and create more opportunities for people to inhabit outdoors and to walk and to cycle through the city. Angel Place, just one final example within the city. Again, inherited a back of house environment. This is one lane back from Martin Place. And what's created here has been really a kind of a lounge room for the city where new retail has come in to occupy the former laneway. It's changed from a vehicular environment to a pedestrian priority place. And the artwork which you can see here is actually quite a sombre artwork really when you understand what it's about. These bird cages here, each one represents a species which has been lost over time due to urbanisation. And there's an oral element to this as well. You can actually walk down here and you can hear the bird songs and the bird calls. It's actually called Forgotten Songs. And you can read on the ground plane about the species and their genus. So, to some Sydney case studies, starting well back. Many of you may not know that some fantastic examples obviously reside in Sydney that have perhaps not talked about that much. One of them is Wildfield Gardens. Way back, 1936, pre-Second World War, a very optimistic project. This is essentially a stacked roof park which terraces down to Sydney Harbour. An incredibly integrated project and one which is a very sublime piece of real estate in Sydney. In 1967, jumping 30 years, one of the most significant projects in terms of the roof park typology is the Reader's Digest building, designed by John James and with a landscape on the top by one of Sydney's seminal landscape architects, Bruce Mackenzie. This has had the benefit of growing for about 40 years now, and there are significant mature trees and a really entrenched landscape on the top of this roof. It's a brutalist building, quite austere on the outside, and it's not until you get up onto the roof that you can experience this kind of landscape. And in the 70s and 80s, there was a range of projects, infrastructural projects, many of which are around Sydney, from the Domain to this one here, Lawrence Hargrave Reserve in King's Cross, which have skinned infrastructure, in this case a car park, with fully accessible parkland. Jumping forward, some of you may have been on the site visits. I think M Central was a part of that. M Central, designed by 360 landscape architects for the Hayson Group, was really a benchmark project for Sydney. It got us all talking about the scale and the potential for retrofitting green roofs of a certain scale within dense urban environments. The developers, I think, have to be commended on this one for taking the risk of doing so. This is a heritage listed building, and the park itself was really used as a marketing device to sell the apartments in this development. It's a sufficient size and it really does operate as a kind of a local park would. You can see the density there. But again, so regardless of its size, it creates a whole series of intimate spaces where the inhabitants of this, I think there's 400 residents in the building, and the figures are pretty staggering of the number of people that use this every day, up to 100 people. And it's not uncommon to see dog walking and using this very much like a public park. So by taking advantage of the big flat roof of the former industrial building, the designers have created a kind of an urban ecosystem here, using water, using shade, a range of design elements, which invites inhabitation. And there's a stark comparison if you see the surrounding buildings here, the use of bitumen roofs, metal deck roofs around the environment, and the heat, of course, that radiates off those when you look at the heat maps of this area is staggering to see how cool this environment is. Jumping forward, a more contemporary example from last year, and again, hopefully some of you were able to go and visit this project, is the Prince Alfred Park and Pool project by Sue Barnsley Design and Neeson Murcutt Architects. This project has won every conceivable award in terms of urban design and architecture and design, and not just for its design but for its sustainability credentials as well. It came at a very interesting time for Sydney. It came at a time, so this is its location near Central Station. It came at a time where the Lord Mayor in particular was not interested at all in having buildings in parks. The brief for this was to retrofit and redesign the swimming pool, and along with that is the ancillary functions that come with the pool. So very hard to not design a building when its core purpose is to upgrade the pool. The ingenious move, of course, was to wrap and fold the landscape up over the building and embed all of those ancillary functions within a green roof, essentially. This is a great view. You can see the scale of the park. You can see the play spine up along the rail line down through here. It's a kind of a modern pleasure ground for the city. It's become a very well-used and well-loved destination, not just for this area, but for Greater Sydney. The flues that you see down through here I'll talk to in a moment, but they're part of a greater energy idea for the city of Sydney. So this transformation of a 19th century park has really moved forward very quickly. And the the left image here where you can see the flues, these are the flues from gas-fired heating for the swimming pool, and the idea being that Sydney is looking towards tri-generation system for energy. And when that comes online, this will be the first contributor to that tri-generation system, and the heat from burning the gas to get energy will be used to power the pool. Some of the other things which I think are innovative in this project are the no-mow grasslands, the meadows, which Sue has designed, particularly around the feet of some grand fig trees which actually line Cleveland Street, a very aggressive and noisy street, which now feels completely separate from the park, which is wonderful. It also creates, of course, an ecosystem for small bugs, birds and the like, which really wasn't there previously. You can see in this image here the sort of the tectonic folds of the meadowlands and the grasses, but also the other layers which come with a project like this, the social sustainability layers, the cafes and the like. It's actually, in a way, a green roof project. This part here is cantilevered over rails, so it's a suspended structure which is taking the weight of significant trees and the like. Next to Prince Alfred Park, and there's not a project here, but I just think it's worth everyone keeping their eyes open on this site to see what happens, and of course advocating and lobbying for the best outcomes for this project, is the Central to Everleigh project, which will essentially see a capping of the open rail line which heads from Central Station west to create over 80 hectares of new space. Ideally, that becomes embedded with green infrastructure initiatives from day one. So watch this space on that one. To a project that's on the books, not a built project, but it's one that we're working on at the moment for the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority. It's called the Goods Line, and the Goods Line is in the same area. It's in Ultimo, nearby to Prince Alfred Park, and essentially it's a 500-metre long public park, in a way a campus spine, if you like. It's an elevated rail line, and it's been compared not unfairly to Manhattan's High Line in many ways. It's a very different project to that. They both are elevated rail lines and they're both transforming them. So I think it's probably a fair comparison in that regard. But this is about really engaging with its environment and inviting interaction in many ways. It's taking a 1854 rail line and it's actually converting it into a 500-metre long linear park. So I might just read this out. The goods line is Ultimo's spine. What was once a conduit for trade is now reinterpreted to carry the precious cargo of a thriving neighbourhood, culture, creativity and community. It's located in a pretty strategic place. The goods line is slightly off the ridge line of Harris Street, but what it does, it provides access from Central Station, Central Park down through here, access for pedestrians and cyclists on grade and level all the way down into Darling Harbour and then beyond. I talked about the 14-kilometre accessible walk, which is really around here in Sydney Harbour. So it provides direct, all abilities access to that. It also creates a place in its own right. I'm going to fly through these images here. They just talk about the kind of grain and the tactile quality of this post-industrial site. It's gravel, there are weeds there are grasses which are remnant. The main defining horticultural feature is the large fig trees which sit down 4 metres down off the site but create an incredible canopy, which if it was a building would be the largest building on a site. Our vision, which we submitted to actually win this project, was something like this. It was a place which brought in nature to the disused rail line, but also created a range of different layers for people to inhabit and use, and we talk about that as social infrastructure. The most interesting thing about the project in terms of perhaps its neighbourhood is the organisations that are around it. Powerhouse Museum, University of Technology, TAFE, the ABC, our national broadcaster. It has a very, very interesting group of collaborators and stakeholders which sit around it and have influenced the process. And I might just take you through this little animation to give you an idea of what's to come. So we're going to start by looking from the south, looking from the north back to the south to Central Station. You can see here some of the stakeholders are popping up. The convention centre, which is down through here, is a 22-hectare project currently being undertaken by the New South Wales Government for exhibitions and conventions. This is the line of the goods line. It's really in two parts, the north and the south, and it's made new connections which have enabled the city to actually connect across this elevated platform. We've designed the entire project so that everything is built off-site and brought to site and fitted together. So that minimises cut and fill, it minimises wastage, and we can get very precise elements built off-site, fabricated and brought in. On the southern part, this is where the University of Technology is, and TAFE. A hotel is down through here, and it's the connection to Central Station through the Devonshire Tunnel, which actually brings you out at this point. We're flying down, and we've broken down the experience into 3 places. We talk about this as the innovation square down through here, and this is really a wireless-enabled environment. We've brought greenery to the edges of the space, but we've intentionally left it very open. We've clad a pretty inert face to an open car park here with a green screen, and we've designed in study pods which are able to be accessed by anyone and used for either study or to access views down the line. As we move down past the ABC, a new stage has been designed with seating, a change to pedestrianise the street, new gardens, new trees have been brought in, all above structure. We've raised everything here. We've retained the heritage rail lines down through the middle, and in the view back you can start to see how all of these things collect to create a new environment, a cooler environment, a green environment down through here. As we turn around and we're going to the piece which is in construction right now, which is the goods line north, we're moving over a heritage bridge, and on the left is the Frank Gehry designed Chachak Wing building, which the goods line forms the forecourt to and the address to. This area here, Business School Square as we're calling it, has a range of raised study areas, turf areas, but also cantilevered study pods which stick out underneath those fig trees, under the canopies and the trunks. And as we move down, you'll start to see the layering of activity, which really speaks to the opportunities for the local community to engage in this place, as well as the students and the other stakeholders around here. We're taking as much advantage as we can of level changes to create space for people to inhabit, seating in this case, for outdoor cinema, communal tables, they're all powered, children's play elements, exercise, and of course remnant areas have been exploited for garden use as well. We call them terrain vague gardens, which are using the materials of the place as the kind of the ballast and the mulch. There's a small building we call the transformer, which is really just a shell for things to happen. It has a stainless steel screen around it, and it can be booked and occupied for seminars, for talks, city talks, whatever. Whatever use is possible can be inhabited in that building. And along the side, along the Powerhouse Museum, we're inviting interaction with that particular organisation to come out and occupy the goods line. So that's just a little snap of the goods line. It's due for completion, this part, in actually February next year, 2015. Next slide, thank you. I'll just flick through a couple of these plans. One of the most interesting things beyond the design of the project has been the engagement of an organisation called the 2020 Vision. They approached us, and they approached us with a very interesting idea. The 2020 Vision is simple: 20% more green space in our urban environments by the year 2020. It's a very tangible thing to get behind, and it's about advocating for more greenery in our urban environments. We believe in it, and we advocate for it. They partnered up with the UTS, Institute for Sustainable Futures, and they're going to track data on this project. They've got a baseline right now, which is social, measuring how many people use the space; economic, they're doing a check of the businesses around the goods line to see how they're trading now. They're doing an ecological analysis. They're measuring the biodiversity of the place, the bees, bugs, birds, etc. And they're going to take measures 1 year out, 2 year out, and 5 year out to see how a project like this can contribute to uplift and benefit all of those factors. And I think for us, that's going to be an incredible outcome that's going to give us quantifiable evidence to advocate more for the benefits of public open space and, in this case, green infrastructure in an urban environment. The other thing I think that's happened recently has been the City of Sydney has been extremely proactive in coming up with a new policy for green roofs and green walls. And I thought I'd just talk to that for a moment because it's a significant step. And again, it's a great tool for us to use to advocate for more green roofs and more green walls in our projects. So it was endorsed by the City of Sydney in April 2014, and what we understand is the first policy in Australia. It's been a long time coming. Policy has been driven by the Green Walls Policy Officer, which they have in Council, Lucy Sharman, and they've had a technical advisory team that's obviously put into that. The reason for it and the pressure behind it has been the projected growth in Sydney in particular of up to 40% by the year 2030. It's a significant increase in terms of population in our urban environment without probably the commensurate opportunity to create the same amount of green space. So if we don't use our accessible areas, our flat roofs, our interstitial spaces, our walls, we're not going to get the green space that we currently have today. So obviously they looked around the world at international precedents and the like, and this was coming out of the Strategy and Urban Design Department in Council, not their environmental group. What that means is that it's actually been embedded, these targets have been embedded into a range of different city plans, which has a greater deal of cut through. So very quickly, the roofs and walls objectives. Main objective, pretty simple, to increase the number of high-quality green roofs and walls in the City of Sydney. Why? Because they improve amenity, livability, slow, clean stormwater, reduce urban heat island, improve building performance, increase food production, I think that's a key one, and urban habitat. Implementation, there's an implementation stream to this as well, and that'll provide specific activities, some of which Council will be doing themselves, but others they will incentivise. The Council will be providing leadership in the development by creating a series of details that can go out to developers to really ameliorate that idea of risk and address those barriers and negative perceptions. They're already installing green roofs and green walls on their own buildings in the city, and they're prototyping them. What are the best fit for particular environments? They're supporting local research through UTS and others, and they're monitoring and seeing what happens over time. So if we just took that area of where the goods line is in Ultimo, a dense inner city suburb, and we just took the basic factors around there, convention centre, 3,000 new residents are going to be down in there, 1,700 new workers, and a bucket load full of visitors that are going to be coming there day to day. Chinatown, 16,000 residents are in this area. Central Station, over 120,000 people come day to day through Central Station. Central to Everleigh, as I showed before, over 80 hectares of new development which will happen right in this area. Central Ultimo, 7,000 residents already exist in the area. UTS and TAFE, 80,000 students day to day in this space. Central Park, which you'll be hearing about in a moment, 2,500 residents, 5,500 workers when that project is finished. So why Ultimo is because it is in this incredible state of change and transformation at the moment. If you look at Ultimo, very simply, it's about 96.5% urban grey and 3.5% urban green. It's pretty much starved of green space. There are a series of little pocket parks around, but nothing substantial. Central Park has been a real contributor to green space. And when you look at the heat map of that, and you understand that those projections, this has been provided by the Climate Change Resource Centre at UNSW, that the average temperature will increase by 3.7% by 2050, just due to global warming with the urban heat island effect. An area like this will really suffer. So if we took the impetus from the Green Walls, Green Roofs strategy, and we took the simple baseline of converting the flat, accessible roofs and transform them from grey to green in an area like Ultimo, what could it mean? And again, we've simply just mapped the flat roofs as an exercise. An uplift of 17% of urban green, which gives a huge amount of accessibility to nature within this city. And this is the kind of thing that we're going to have to do. And the goods line is a project we think that delivers on this type of initiative. Why? Because it cools a city, 4.5 degrees in Mediterranean climates. It'll reduce energy consumption, as listed before. It'll manage stormwater, improve urban biodiversity. And the most important one, I think, for us is that it improves human health and well-being, both psychological and physical. And we hope in 2015 that you'll be able to come back and see that along the goods line. So, thank you.
That was wonderful. Okay, so we are going to have Michael come up and give the next presentation.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks. I'm indeed very pleased to be able to share a bit of Singapore's work with you. I'm sure all of you are very pleased and quite impressed with Sacha's work. I just want to say that in case he feels he's not recognized and appreciated enough, people like me would be out of a job if not for people like him. Yeah. So obviously, well done. It's very impressive. Okay, a bit about Singapore and ourselves. We are a company that is involved with landscape management and construction. We have got a fairly large maintenance department. We have a small design and build because we design green walls, green roofs, and a little bit of commercial projects. And of course, green walls and green roofs are one of our mainstays in our company. We've got over 30 years of experience doing all these things in Singapore. Manpower is about 500 odd today, and we run it through a nursery that's about 5.5 hectares. Okay, a little bit about Singapore. There are about more than 50 hectares of skyrise greenery in Singapore. That's obviously equivalent to more than probably 100 football fields size. So that's quite large for a small country like Singapore. So commercial buildings take up about 63% of the green spaces. Public housing, only about 18%. Government-owned buildings, about 11%. Institutions, 8%. So if you look at the chart of, the map of Singapore, in 1986, there are only about 666 square kilometers, population 2.7 million, and only about 36% green coverage. But today, lo and behold, by some special miracle, we've increased our land size. And how do we do it? The government has gone through massive land reclamation. We take the sand out of the surrounding seabeds. We make friends with our neighboring countries to import their sand. And our population today is increased to 4.6 million, with a planned population going up to 5.5 in probably 20 years or less. So that's a tremendous increase in population size for a small increase in land area. But our green coverage has now increased by an amazing 11% to 47%. So this is our effort towards beating the heat island effect in Singapore. Okay, a bit of what I said earlier, 5.1 million, land area 714 square kilometers. In case you don't know where Singapore is, right down at the tip here, you can see where we are. Oh, you can see it there, good. Yeah. It works, yeah, okay. Australia is here, Sydney is here, and we're right down here, 7 hours away. Okay, what are the green solutions that we've employed in Singapore? Today I'll just confine my talk to two of the more prominent, obvious areas, which are green walls and green roofs. The picture on the top there is an iconic project designed by the inventor of the system, Dr. Patrick Blanc. So I shan't say too much in case I say the wrong things. Yeah. The one down below is the green roof that I'm going to talk very much about because it's something which we're very proud of because of the scale and the difficulty involved in doing that. Okay. Now, I'm not going to say very much about all these benefits because all of you are practitioners and experts. I'm here. But I think I would like to talk and impress everybody why we should continue with this pursuit, because in Singapore, as you know, we are 1 degree 15 north of the equator. So what does it mean? It's a very, very consistently hot country. And because of this, anything that can mediate the heat island effect works for us. So we've done, there were some tests done together by National Parks Board, the university, and the HDB is our public housing developer. So they went on to do a test on existing car park roof to test various systems of green roofs to find out how it affects the environment. So the most important finding, of course, was that of the heat remediation. So we get up to 12 degrees, and I've personally taken some readings myself. It has gone up to 15 degrees difference between the temperature of the slab against, just above the slab, I mean the ambient temperature, against one with a green roof. So it's very, very substantial difference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of green walls that are presently being implemented in Singapore. First and foremost is the vertical support system, all right? So it's essentially using some kind of a mesh structure or a cable structure to help the climbers to grow. And then there's the vertical carrier system, and this is something that's probably more popular, seen more commonly all over the world. So it consists of panels which are pre-vegetated, or it could be a container, a carrier, a module carrier. Then, of course, very importantly is we cannot have a living wall without the irrigation and the fertigation system, the drainage system, and sometimes the lighting system. Okay, vertical support systems, some Singapore project references. The projects I'm going to show you will be mostly projects that our company has covered over the several years. And several of them, I'm happy to say, has somehow won some award or the other. No mean feat to me alone, but people like Sacha who dares to conceive them and makes people like us build them. All right, so two of these jobs here has won different awards, not just from the landscape perspective, but from the building perspective, the type of green features that were put in. The one on the right here has won several, I think, international awards, not just in Singapore alone. And you can see this is one of the earlier projects that was done sometime, I think about 6 years ago, I think. They were daring enough to have a green wall that goes up 35 stories that time. So the system employed here was essentially one of a mesh structure and with the capability of easier maintenance whereby access was provided at the rear of the wall through catwalk systems and so on and so forth to make sure that this is something that is sustainable. Another example of a vertical carrier support system. As you can see, just by building a cage, you can get a green wall in the shortest time possible. This is something which I think was very clever. When you can see that the cable support system was used to create a simple green facade to make it appear like we are planting conifers on the facade of the building. So when seen from far and when lit at night, this building is quite interesting. I hope I have a picture here that shows you what the night view is like. Maybe not, sorry. Yeah. Okay, now we go to the vertical carrier system. There are 4 types that are presently used in Singapore. The first one is a felt system. Second one is a modular system. Third one, the potted system. And the last one is a mesh or panel system. I believe that all these systems are also probably used in Australia. I think earlier on, Jeff and Mark went through some of their systems before. And I'm glad to say that we're all on the same track as well. So of course, now for the modular system, please excuse me if I seem a little bit biased towards this because this system that is manufactured by our my sister company. So I've got to talk a little bit about it if you don't mind. All right. Now, what is good about this system is that essentially it allows pre-vegetation. I think a lot of times we all face with the fact that we want something to be built green and look established as soon as possible. And this is one of the systems that allow this to happen. So what does it consist of? Basically, it's a plastic module made out of recycled material. So that gives us a bit of plus point. Hey, I'm green, you know, because we use recycled materials. So this has also gone through a serious tunnel test because it was engineered to be a very safe product. And that's one of the reasons why we took that extra trouble to make sure that it's going to be a more expensive material. But I think at the end of the day, for the right jobs, this product is deserving of it because of the engineering behind it. So there are steel mounting brackets which are made of stainless steel. The pilasters also made of stainless steel. And then if you ask us why we go through this effort of putting expensive material inside, it's because we understand that when you're dealing with green walls, you're dealing with fertigation, you're dealing with chemicals, which can be very alkaline. Leaks can happen, drips can happen, and so on. And therefore, we've had systems for safety reasons whereby we used to use powder-coated, galvanized, mild steel structures, but we found that, hey, it can cause a problem. So we switched to stainless steel. Now, the other thing about it is I'll just show you some examples of how this particular VGM was used in Singapore. So this project is taken off at was built at Orchard Central Mall. This was one of the earlier winners of the Skyrise Greenery Award. One of our Singapore colleagues from National Parks Board was showcasing some of the earlier projects. And this is one of them that won an award because of the scale and size of it. Another one is recently done at a project called JEM, which is a mixed-use development of retail as well as office center. This is now in the new Orchard Road of Singapore on the western part. And as you may have heard, Singapore requirements now is that you have to give a 100% minimum green replacement for the site that you cover. Now this one has gone one up beyond it. It's gone 122% of green. And you can see from this picture, all these little green parts actually are plants, all right? And that's a picture below of the green wall, and this encompasses several parts of the building. Another picture of where the VGM was used. This is in a high-end boutique furniture shop. And then, again, we've used it in several public institutions building, like the Temasek Polytechnic. Another project is very interesting. This was taken off from the Resorts World Sentosa. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it's one of the more visible projects. There are two done in Singapore. One is at the Resorts World, which is on Sentosa Island. The other one is over at the Marina Bay Sands. That was the opening slide where you saw the flywheel, the circular flywheel, as well as that boat-shaped building at the end of the bay. That's the Marina Bay Sands. So both of these projects carry this, this system, as well as the airport. All right, the felt system, okay? I speak with all humility. He's gone now, so I can speak a little bit more. All right. There's design flexibility, obviously, because it's basically a very soft system. Suitable for both indoors and outdoors. So you can take any type of shape, inclination, angles, and so on. All right? And the great part about it is that it is soilless. So I think in Singapore, it's very funny, you know. We all like to have green stuff. But the average resident of Singapore squirms when they see a millipede even. You won't believe it, you know. Yeah, they'll say, kill it, you know. Out comes the letter to us, kill it by tomorrow, 7 a.m. or else. Yeah, it's quite amazing. They don't quite understand why. So, okay, this system will take care of that problem. Now, what does it consist of? Essentially, it is a felt system mounted on the backing board. And then when it's all set up, the backing board, of course, sits on an engineered frame. So when it's all done up, this is where the artistic part comes. Dr. Blanc is actually an artist, and what he'll do is, there he comes again. Yeah. Patrick, I'm showing your slides, okay, your pictures. Yeah. Artistically, he will sketch this on a piece of paper, and then this will be traced out on the felt before work starts. And then, by all miracles, from this, you get this. Right, this is the job that we did for him over at 6 Battery Road. And this wall goes up about 8 meters high only, and then fully enclosed interior air-conditioned space. And Dr. Blanc is actually created what I call a living tapestry, because there's over 123 different types of plants, which of course is a terrible challenge for me to keep alive. But today, it's still quite there. So some more examples of how it was used in Singapore. This is done at a new hospital in Singapore on the atrium area where it's used as for private functions. Behind the dry wall, or this is supposed to be a water wall, but they must have shut off the water when we took the picture. Another entrance to hotel, Sofitel, just opened in Singapore. NV residence. So you can see that, it can be both an indoor system as well as an outdoor system. Now, I would like, after having learned it from Dr. Blanc, many people, some people may think that this is not a very green style because it is hydroponic, or they assume it is hydroponic. Actually, I thought so too before I started to work on it with Dr. Blanc. But if you choose the right plant species, it need not be a hydroponic system. So in other words, you can treat it like a normal planting on a media and irrigate it accordingly. Some people said that, oh, I'm going to use 5 liters per square meter on the system, and it's a terrible waste. I don't know, in other countries where it's perhaps drier, the humidity is lower, you may need more water. But we have done tests in our nursery itself, and we found that we can keep it going as happily as watering it once a day. And when I say watering once a day, I just mean a splash of water. That's all it takes, just by choosing the right plant species. But generally, it's not a water wasting system. Some more examples in a condo. So you can see that it's been done here. This is a mixture of both Dr. Blanc's system and a modular system below. Okay, the other system that's often used now is a potted system. Same, easy to install, it's a recycled blob. And most importantly, we find that this system is great for small projects or systems that you want to put up very quickly for a short span of time, like an exhibition hall, for example, something quick and carry for DIY, for residents. And it's basically done with pots hanging on bracketed systems like this that can be installed on walls or can be freestanding. All right, so as you can see, it's as simple as ABC. That's why it's very popular. I think over in Australia, the DIY market is quite important. And that's why Elmich Australia tells me that their business actually is a lot going to the DIY centers. So some examples of how these pots are done in Singapore. We use them for simple residences where in place of screens, instead of just a plain screen, you can see that it can be quite attractively done together with plants. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can see all these photos are shot very shortly after it was implemented. That means that this is almost an instant system and very easy to install. Okay, some more examples. Exhibitions, as I mentioned earlier. This is all set up in 1 day or less. Okay, this is a very interesting project which I'm going to talk about. Unfortunately, it wasn't done by me, but I have to talk about it. This was done in an old building in Cecil Street, which was very extensively renovated. Prior to this, the atrium was all mostly boarded up from the outside. But after renovation, you can see from this picture here how the inside was brought outside. The glass, the facade was changed from glass to let light through. In its place, at night, this becomes a lantern. And from the lobby down below, it goes right through up the atrium, up to the 6th floor. And interestingly, some of the spaces in the upper floors are within the offices of private companies. And therefore, it looks as though their space now becomes private space, and the private space becomes, the public space becomes their space. It's a very successful, renovated building, won a lot of awards in Singapore and overseas. And if you can, do drive by at night. It's a wonderful sight. There's another iconic project done in Singapore using a pod system by a company called Consys. Very daringly, they tried to create the Singapore map and a world map with plants. So this picture was taken shortly after installation. If you go today, I think you probably see a very fuzzy world out there. Because things grow, yeah? Not easy to maintain shapes unless you are really, really very, very hands-on in making sure you trim them every week or so. Yeah, but it's a pretty successful job, and I think it's done a great job about greening otherwise a very hard surface, which is the car park behind it. Yeah, another system that's used in Singapore is the panel system. And this is used in gardens by the bay. If you look closely, all the bromeliads are planted using preformed panels to fit the shape of the funnel. Okay, some more examples of panel systems that's very successfully implemented. This is done by a company called Greenology in Singapore. Okay. Out of all these design considerations, I think I'll talk very briefly on the selection criteria for the planting media. Why do I say this? Because I think there's a gray area between maintainability and sustainability. So when we talk about maintainability, it's usually to do with the access, perhaps the choice of plant materials and so on. But all things being equal, I think planting media is a function, will be a big factor of sustainability in the future. If you all bought potted plants from the nursery and you keep it in your pot for a year or so, you'll find after a while you're losing organic mass because it's all taken up, highly organic. The nurseries love it because it's cheap, it does its job. But when we go into a green wall situation, we have to think very seriously about it. How often do we get a chance to get up there to replace the plant? As you know, our plants, the size of the leaf area and so on is a function of the root size. Function of root size is again constrained by the size of the holder and so on. But without media to carry your nutrients or to promote your microfloras and so on and so forth, we have a future problem. And that's why I think one of the reasons why we go into a little bit more of a mineral-based system rather than an organic-based system is to think of a sustainable future for maintenance. Plant selection, light, irrigation, nutrient, and so on. Okay, let me just hurry up a little bit. Okay, I've spoken about that. We go on. I got to show you the key projects that we're talking about. Okay, light, I think is very important. If you're designing something, give a thought about light, because our eye response and the plant responses for lights are totally different. What's bright to you is not bright enough for the plant. As you can see, the plant's photosynthetic response, photosynthesis response is highest at 440 and 650 nanometers wavelength. All right. Irrigation, yeah, this is very standard for a green wall system. Now, I want to talk to you about this iconic project which was done in Singapore. It's done by, the owner is the Institute of Technical Education, architect is RSP, the landscape contractor, and for this, we designed it in collaboration with the with the building architect, RSP. So what is this project about? It's won the green mark, the platinum mark, which is the highest green mark available in Singapore. It's won Skyrise Greenery Award, as well as the Landscape Industry Awards of Excellence. All right, we put in about 523 square meters of green walls in this building, and it's ranging from heights up to 35 meters high, and mostly around 35 meters high. It's done in the exterior as well as the interior. This gives a breakdown of where the green walls are. As you can see, the average area is about 600 to 800 square meters per wall. We're using the vertical carrier systems. This typical example of the schematics is done in 3 zones for the irrigation. Each color represents a zone, and this is done actually to make sure that we have enough pressure, as well as that the pressure compensation is not overdone. Some pictures of the irrigation systems. And installation at the start, for us to build the pilasters, they have to build all these stagings to make sure that it's cantilevered so that people can walk underneath while we work. And that's when the pilasters were put in place. You can see a picture of the size of the initial staging. Then came the modules and the irrigations being put in. Now, the irrigation, this is interesting in that we put them all at the top of each module. 1 square meter is about 4 modules. That means per square meter, we have 16 irrigation points. All the modules were pre-planted in the nursery. So if you can imagine, we're dealing with 20 over 1,000 individual modules. This is a picture of how the initial design pattern was. Each of the pixels here actually represent 1 square meter of a module. We use mobile platforms as well as gondolas to do this. For the exterior, because of the height of the wall, we had to use a huge mobile elevated working platform. And that's a picture right after completion. Interior walls, okay? That's one of the finished product. Okay, now we talk about green roofs. I think more important, you all know that there are extensive roofs and intensive roofs. So let me just run right down to the project that I want to show you. I have how many, 5 minutes left, or am I done? I'm done, okay. All right, forget about all the stuff. Let me go into the project. 5 minutes, Ken? All right? Yeah. Okay. Now, this is very interesting because we took a lot of effort to do the studies of this green roof system. Okay, let me run into it. Okay. This is a picture of a retrofitted green roof in Singapore using that system. Yeah. Okay. All right, this is the one I want to show you. All right, this is done at Resorts World Sentosa. Landscape consultant is ICN Design. Before, after, intensive green roof. Intensive green roof again. And now we're talking about how that extensive green roof was done. It's covering the entire Universal Studios. About 35,000 square meters of green roofs were covered. An 18 months field trial was done to make sure that the plant system does suit the environment. The trial was done in a nursery, 3 weeks. These were all the various species that were attempted. So you can see the sequence at which the trials were done. February, March, right up to August, right up to from 09 to 210. The sequence of which it was late. Okay. February 2010, June 2010. So you can see the growth that was achieved in just 4 months. And then in August, we had 2 types of roof. We had the pitch roof and the flat roof. The earlier one was a flat roof system. This is a pitch roof. Again, very interesting. We had to level the pitch roof with Verticell and to the finished product. January 2010, March 2010, it grew a little bit. May 2010, and June, you can see that the coverage in the space of 6 months, in about 7 months, you get full coverage of the entire system. Now, this is what it looks like in July 2011. The lushness of the planting. Okay, let me skip that. So I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to say is that big projects have their own problems, but it all can be achieved with a little bit more planning. The bigger the project, the more planning that management has to do to get it done into a successful project. And with this, I thank you very much for letting me extend my time by 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right, so we're running a little bit late, but we're going to keep moving. We have Dr. Patrick Blanc, who we all know and love, and we'll hear from him some of his latest work.
So, Michael, yes, hello, everybody. You did not speak about what I think is maybe the best vertical garden in Singapore is in a huge glass house where you have an incredible vertical garden, because the first time I see the Viraya rhododendrons, you know, the epiphytic rhododendrons from Southeast Asia and New Guinea, perfectly growing. You see also the hanging Lycopodium, epiphytic Lycopodium in the genus Upersia, very well growing. And it's strange because some people told me, oh no, but they change the plants very often because they die. It's not true at all. As a botanist, I can tell you, I see when a plant is growing or when it is changed. And I can tell you in this case, it's really a big success. And I think about botanical interest for some group of plants like these rhododendrons, it's really the best of the world. On the first one, I think the first one that these Viraya rhododendrons are grown on vertical gardens. On the substrate is a very thin. It's not a felt, but it's a pulverization of a mix of turf, of a mix of. Yes. So it's really, I think, a very, very exciting thing. So again, I speak here in Sydney. I did speak already quite many times. So the difficulty is to try not to repeat exactly the same thing every time. But I'll focus this time mostly, of course, on one central part. But I'll show you also some other projects, just because some people maybe don't know. To show that actually 35 years. I'm doing this because les fougères poussent même au plafond means are even growing from the ceiling. And you see on the left side my first vertical garden. Of course, if I had this article about 35 years ago, it means that I was already in this, or I was already a little bit known to have an article like this. So you see, it's an old story. Of course, here you see a high diversity of plant shapes, because I consider, as a botanist, the opportunity to study, and still to study, since about 30 years, the architecture of the plant growing in the shade of tropical rainforest. And in this case, these plants which receive only 1% of full sunlight have adaptation of the plant architecture, I mean branching patterns, to avoid to have overlapping of the leaves. So it's why you have so perfect architecture in understory plants. So working, you see, just above the water. And so we speak about biodiversity. Of course, in outdoor, birds are coming by themselves, but indoor, you have to introduce them like this Chlorophonia on a Schefflera. And you see, they can breed also, and they use my felt, you see, to make their nest. They use the felt on some, so they clean the old leaves, old fern leaves to use. So you can also have some lizard because my shelf books are close to the vertical garden. So you see in the water, so many aquatic plants. And I became a botanist because I did love the cryptocoryne. It's a plants from, from the streams, forest streams in Southeast Asia. And so these cryptocoryne are perfectly growing here. Outdoor, also you see in the patio, many plants, and again, you see many empty places. And when you have empty places, you have a much more three-dimensional result, and this is much more natural. So you see, we have it's a kind of troglodyte house, and we have the windows inside. So I love all these iris. This is Iris wati from South China, and from Taiwan. This is Iris japonica with very beautiful shape of leaves. You see, and the leaves are hanging at the end of, you see, this stem which has no leaves. So I'm always very careful about plant architecture, because if you have a good feeling when you look at a vertical garden, it's because you have not only 5 or 10 or 20 species, it's because really your eye can catch what you think is interesting about plant architecture. This is interesting. It's a colocasia, so it's, everybody knows this, but this one is very cold tolerant because I collected it in Taiwan, and it can withstand -7, -8 degrees. So it's for temperate places, it's very useful. So you see, they can withstand cold. My first official commission work, actually, it was 30 years ago. It was installed in 1986 in the Museum of Science and Industry in Paris. But, of course, if it was installed in 86, it means that we did begin to work on the project in 84. So since 30 years, so this was one of the first, it was the first commission work. But nobody was interested. Finally, it was 8 years later when I was invited for the Garden Festival in Chaumont-sur-Loire in south of France that suddenly everybody was interested by my vertical garden. So you see, probably it was a little bit too early in 1986. So afterwards, it was mostly contemporary art who was interested by my work, much more than architects. And this is the Cartier Foundation in Paris, where I did install this vertical garden. It was supposed to stay only for 3 months in 1998, so you see 16 years ago. And instead of 3 months, it is still here now after 16 years. Very natural-looking work, you see, very natural. But to have this natural effect, of course, you have to know which plant you put in which place according to the growth during many years, because this one also is 15 years old. Installation, so you see, it's simple. So I use very small plants, usually for outdoor at the beginning, about 30 plants per square meter. And so you have scaffolding, different ways to install the plants. This was the first high vertical garden in the world. It was in 2001, 13 years ago, with the famous indoor architect André Putman. It is 32 meters high. And so, of course, suddenly people did see that the vertical garden was not simply something, kind of creation of a scientist or a fancy guy or something like that, but that it could match well with the ugly empty walls of the cities. So suddenly, in 2001, everybody in the world was interested by my vertical garden. So André Putman, she died, unfortunately, two years ago, but so she was very important because it's interesting that an indoor architect, she did see my works at home, for instance, which are 3 meters high. And she told me, Patrick, come with me to Champs-Élysées for my project of hotel. Tell me if you can do something 10 times higher, 30 meters high. So you see, it's very important. The change of scale, you know, in biology especially, is always very important. What you can do at 3 meters, maybe you cannot do for 10 or 30, or like here in One Central Park, 120 meters high. So design, of course. So some to show you some quite a big project, quite old, more than 10 years ago. The famous work with Jean Nouvel 10 years ago at the Quai Branly Museum. Also, this was another step which did make the vertical garden very famous all over the world. And it was funny because at the beginning, Jean Nouvel wanted to have simply metallic ivy climbing on this building. And he did ask me, do you think that instead of metal plants, we could have true plants? I did say, of course we can. So we had to change everything because everything was already decided for the permit of construction. So it did take a little bit time to change everything. So you see it growing after, so this is probably 5 years later. Another very pure project I did do in Seoul also with Jean Nouvel. So it was a very zen place. So I decided in this case to use quite few plant species, small, very moss-like, to have this very calm effect. Project also a quite famous project with Herzog and de Meuron for the Kesha Forum in Madrid. So it's a very beautiful, the interaction between the red color of the metal and the green of the plant. It's about also 10 years or 8 years ago. Very well growing, but I don't know why. I did see it 2 months ago. They are replacing parts of the felt, and I did see in garbage my plants in perfect state, a conifer perfectly green, cut in small pieces to be thrown away. I was not at all happy seeing that, and I don't know why they are doing that, and why I don't know this, because it's a creation, and I should be aware of what happens. But only one part is destroyed, but to see living plants cut in small parts in garbage is a little bit terrible when they are almost 10 years old. Of course, I don't like this too much. At night, so it's very important when you think about vertical garden to think about the night effect, because otherwise it's a black hole. Work in London on Athenaeum Hotel at the corner here, so just planted. And this photo I did take last week. So you see last week, after 6 years, I think, I did install it. So you see perfectly growing, and I love this Astelia, the gray leaves of Astelia. So I'm happy because it's the first time in Europe I could, because it's not so cold in London. Climate is not cold in winter. So Astelia, which are almost impossible in Paris to have because it's too cold in winter, here are perfectly thriving, and many other very interesting species are growing on this wall in London. Just to show you the the time plants need to grow. So this in Paris last year. So you see it's after about 2 months of growth. And just so you see not quite many species, because there are altogether 235 species for this vertical garden. You have the list of the species here. Just to show you how I work, because I know how the plants are growing and which will be the interaction. So you see, yesterday a lady did ask me, why do you always design oblique like this? Now everybody in the world is copying this kind of design, so you cannot see a vertical garden without lines like this. So actually, I do this for 2 reasons. First is that when you look at a cliff, usually you see that the plants are growing in the cracks. Some species are growing, the same species invade one crack. And the cracks usually are not vertical, not horizontal, very often oblique. So this is one reason, because in nature you have more often this kind of oblique. And second reason is that when you have oblique like this, you have interaction between the species above and under. And this is important, for instance, in case of disease or parasites. If you have a big patch which is almost around, of course, you can have big problems of parasite or disease of the foliage inside, but when it's not thick at all in height, actually, you have less chances that the parasite or disease spread in one species. So for the global sustainability of the vertical garden, it's better to have linear patches like this than to have round patches. And aesthetically also, I think it's better. So you see how I work. I know that one species I'll put here because, of course, at the top, I put usually plants growing at the top of the cliffs. And when you go down, I put more and more plants which are from forest understory or much more close to waterfalls, something like that. So I install plants like this, step by step. You see, I design step by step, and finally, like this, I make some changes, and finally, this is the final design with the 230. So you see, at installation, 1 week after installation, in April last year, and you see 3 months after, in June. So you see between April and June, so plants are growing very, very fast because you have 30 plants per square meter. And after, in September, so you see 6 months after plant installation. Many flowers. This I show you, this lady, she's a friend, but because this quite small vertical garden, she's writing books about plants and about cooking with plants, and she told me, Patrick, please make a vertical garden with plants I can eat. So I did say no radish, no salad, because you kill them when you eat them, but herbs you have just to cut a little bit. So I did put about 80 different herbs, about 10 different rosemary, thymus, sage, you know, all marjolaine, so many different herbs. And every morning she takes scissors and she cuts and she gives to many friends around. Some very beautiful project for in Japan for the Kanazawa 21st Century Museum. Another kind of project to show you another type of three-dimensional I did do with the architect Edouard François. And you have climbing plants on sticks, oblique, 3-meter long sticks. It's in Paris, La Défense. In New York, it looks like being outdoor, but it is indoor protected by glass at 1 meter. And so it's a tropical climate inside. So in winter, it's interesting because it's at the cross of 58 on the Lexington. So you can see the plants. This a little bit like what you did call before, Michael, about longer stripes. It's in Bangkok, along an elevator, 35 meters high, in a shopping mall. And so it's a very narrow vertical gardens. Another project in Bangkok for Siam Paragon. I go quickly for the old project. In a canyon street in Paris. So it's very important, of course, in a canyon street because everybody speaks about, everybody was speaking to you since this morning about the advantage for the climate, blah, blah, blah. So we are aware, totally aware of that. But what is sure is that when you have a canyon street, of course, a vertical garden in this case is really very useful, even in the place of the canyon street. You feel immediately that the air is much more pure. When you are in an open place like here at One Central Park, of course, the advantage is global for the city. But in a canyon street, you feel not only psychologically, but also you have really an effect on the depollution of the air. So in canyon street, it's very important. It's the same indoor. To have a big indoor work like this, I did do in Taiwan for the National Theater. So in this case, also indoor in a theater like this, it's of course useful for depollution. You know, at home, I was smoking 2 packs a day, and my friend also, he was smoking 2 packs a day. So we had 80 cigarettes per day in a place where we did never open the windows, but we had many vertical gardens. So you see, you can smoke 80 cigarettes per day without any problem when you have vertical gardens. So this is true. During many years, now I did stop smoking. He did not stop, but me, I did stop. So just to tell you that actually, of course, indoor vertical gardens are important. A project in Hong Kong, I did do for a hotel, and I did design all this very organic shape, because at the beginning the architects wanted just a panel here, and I did say it's much more interesting to have something organic embracing the bridges. So voila, it's the icon. It's called the Icon Hotel in Hong Kong. You see a canyon street in Paris, ugly canyon street. You see it's 150 meters long, and they did renovate all the apartments on the opposite side, and they had this in front of the apartment. So, of course, they did ask me, is it possible to do something in this ugly street in Paris? So, of course, I did do something after 2 years of growth. You see, it's very high. It's 30-something, and very, very long. Altogether, 1,700 square meters, something like that, I don't. So you see the structure, very simple structure, metallic frame fixed to the existing wall. The recycled, if possible, recycled PVC, expanded PVC. I say if possible, because in some cases it's possible. In France, it's very difficult to have recycled PVC. But for instance, in London for the airport, we were speaking about problem of resistance to fire, and for not Qantas lounge, for the SkyTeam lounge in London, I did use an expanded concrete, which is perfect to fix the felt and to staple inside. So it's possible, of course, to use something else, expanded PVC. And also about the felt, now I did discuss with a guy to try to work with laminated aluminium silicate, you know, and in this case, aluminium silicate with leaves maybe could be a good substrate instead of old recycled. No, this is silk, so it's not good, but usually it's polyamide. Most of my shirts are in polyamide, not this one. It's from Joe Bananas in Sydney, this one. And so all the recycled polyamide clothes, because they cannot rot at all, so they can stay for many, many years. When I say many years, my oldest patches of felt are now 30 years old, 32 in 1982. Car parking, I love to make works in very difficult places. So you see it's an 8th floor car parking in south of France. A huge bridge in south of France, Aix-en-Provence. Challenging climate also are very important. This is in Bahrain. I was invited by the lady Ministry of Culture from Bahrain to make a conference, and she told me, please walk in Bahrain and tell me where you should like to do a work. And I did say, because Bahrain before was the only oasis in this area, because they had water from the water table coming out from Saudi Arabia and emerging in Bahrain. But after many new works along the sea, now it's finished because it's mixed with the seawater. So the oasis is finished, did vanish. So I did say it should be good to have a kind of reminiscence for the people that Bahrain was the only oasis of the Gulf. So I did propose to make a work on this old house. And I did select about 130 species, and I'm happy because about 80 are perfectly growing. You know, when you have 50 degrees in summer, it's very important to choose the right species. So you see, it doesn't seem we are in Bahrain because the plants are very well growing. To show you some huge works, so it's to embrace a huge shopping mall in France. Of course, design as always. Another. One of the highest in Madrid, and it's a Cesar Pelli Crystal Tower, and that did make the vertical garden at the top, the last 40 meters at the top of this Crystal Tower designed by Cesar Pelli. Cesar Pelli also did design the wonderful towers, Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur. I love the work by Cesar Pelli. So you see at the top, the 40 last meters, so they are highest of the world because if I remember, the tower is something like 280 meters high, something like that, almost 300. A new work with Herzog and de Meuron, again in Miami, where I did cover 70 columns all around the new Museum of Contemporary Art in Miami Beach. So it's very exciting because it's just in front of the sea. So it means that you have, of course, a lot of spray of seawater because, you know, there are many hurricanes. And, you know, climate in Miami is a very easy climate. But when you have hurricanes, it's not so easy. And plants have to receive a lot of sea spray. So I did choose the species according to this. And I could select 70, 80 species, I think, if I remember. So you see, I did make all the designs like this. So installation, each column of the 70 columns is 2 tons. So, of course, it was a lot of work to install them. So you see, they're taken with the design on irrigation already prepared, but not the plants. So install with each black spot is a place of a plant. And finally, it's installed. It's finished. Officially, inauguration was 1 year ago, almost 1 year ago in December for the art fair, for the Basel Art Fair. But it was not finished at all. It's finished since about 3 or 4 months. And I'll go to check in about 1 month again. So you see, it was, this was in last December. So you see already many are, but not planted everywhere, but very well growing. So Australia, we arrived in Australia. The first work with Mark Newson, it was in, I think about 2006, something like that. I don't remember exactly. So you know, you have a chance in Australia to have one of the most famous indoor architect, or more than indoor architect, because Mark is also a kind of artist making different things also with planes and everything. So he did make a very beautiful work for the Qantas first class air lounge in Sydney and also in Melbourne, but mostly in Sydney. So this was the work installed some years ago, so 6, 7 years ago, and it was the work with Mark Paul. And you see, contrary to me, Mark Paul, 8 years later, looks younger than at that time. Not same as me. I did look younger. So what is your secret, Mark? I don't know if he's here. But he has a secret. I don't know if you have a good aesthetic surgery. I don't know. But anyway, it was a beautiful adventure. And it was a lot of work for Mark because I did ask many plants, very difficult to get. And so it could get in Queensland, in different parts of Australia. Afterwards, we did decide the work for one Central Park. And we did decide to, when I say we, actually the story of one Central Park is a little bit special because Jean Nouvel, at the beginning, we had me, I was involved in the project in 2008. So in June 2008, so you see it means 6 years ago. Of course, with Fraser, Jean Nouvel was already involved in the design of the buildings. And when we had the first, it is, at the beginning, he did put green things, but it was climbers. And when we had a meeting with Dr. Stanley Quake, at the head of Fraser, the client, so in Paris, Stanley did say to Jean, please, Patrick Blanc is involved to choose your plants for climbers and for flower pots. Please put vertical garden. So we did work with the architects of Jean Nouvel studio. We did work a lot to know where we could install vertical gardens, which should not be at all in the project at the beginning. So it was quite a funny work. We did change many times, here. The size also, we had to decide the length, the width, and also the problem according to the windows, because, of course, people had to keep windows open. So, of course, there were many changes in the project due to this vertical garden. So before, Stanley Quake did say, please do a first work. So we did do on another Fraser place, a work at Trio And Trio had many adventures. It was very well growing. It was a water shortage 2 years ago. It was terrible. And then again, 2 weeks ago, another water shortage. And again, it's terrible. But I did discuss with the guy in charge of the plant. He told me that looking with binoculars, it seems that many plants will recover. But now it's ugly. It's totally covered with dried leaves. But anyway, you know, in nature, when you have cliffs like this, and when you have an El Nino effect, the same, for instance, in Malaysia, it was very, very dry during the last March and April, and I did see on cliffs, which I know are always covered with plants, I did see all the plants dead, and after they recover, either from tubers or from seeds, and so it's also a part of the life. We have to admit that sometimes a vertical garden can have big problems. So it was the first design. You see, no vertical gardens. It was simply climbing plants. It was not very clear in the idea. It was, you see, something like this. You see, so there were mostly planter boxes, but no vertical gardens at all. This was in 2008. So you see all the design of the planter boxes on each floor, but nothing, as you can see. So you see all this. And we did work a lot because Jean, to have a problem of white, to have a very low white, we did a thing to a kind of vertical garden, but oblique with empty space in the middle to have a very light white. So it means you have same effect as a planter box with plants growing everywhere above, but instead of having soil, very heavy soil, you have something very light. Finally, we did not do this, and the planter boxes are much more reduced and not so much. It's a pity because it should have been very exciting, but you know the project evolves. But I keep this idea, I keep really in mind. 5 minutes? So when we first visited the place with Dr. Quake, who is here, Craig Elgie also in the project, William Lam. So we did decide where it was good to put vertical gardens. So finally, this was the final design. You see models. And I did present the work to Lady Clover Moore, to your mayor. I did make a conference in 2009 because she was very important because, you know, this project was very challenging and many people did worry a lot. And Lady Clover Moore, she did say it's a very good project because I did explain it should be mostly native Australian plants. So it was very important for the project that she was interested when I did make the conference in Sydney in 2009. So you see, a project needs time. So I'll show you just some places in Australia very inspiring. It's Wentworth Falls. And on Wentworth Falls, you have Beckea linifolia, for instance, a plant I love, and we have on Darren from Andreasen's nursery told me that he has still 200 cuttings ready to be installed in some empty places, and I'm very happy. So you see also a plant which is growing only on 5 waterfalls in Blue Mountains, just 2 hours from here, around Wentworth Falls. This is on Wentworth Falls, so it's a Microstrobos, the only conifer growing in Cascade. It's a Microstrobos fitzgeraldi, and I'm very happy because you can see on the first wall, very easy, you can touch them. They are perfectly growing, and I have 100 Microstrobos fitzgeraldi, and I think it's the only place in the world where you can see this Microstrobos perfectly growing with hanging stems. So Beckea linifolia, you see it's this incredible member of Myrtaceae, and with hanging stems, and I'm very happy to have 200 more, but the ones which are here are already very well growing. You see the hanging branches of this Beckea linifolia. You see Dracophyllum secundum is also here, a plant I love also. You see Dracophyllum secundum growing, hanging totally vertically from the cliff with the tip of the branches reclining upwards. Different plants also, again, in the Sticherus, so many different things. So you have some epacris also, very difficult to grow, unfortunately, but perfectly adapted to vertical space, very humid sipping rocks like this. Alania, which is endemic also from the Blue Mountains, very close to here, Alania and Licheri, very common on some rocks, but restricted, very narrow, restricted, endemic. So some Blechnum, of course, Libercia pulchella, a small plant I love, the famous your Viola Ederacea. So also all these plants from around Sydney are now on the One Central Park vertical garden. This I love, this Melaleuca hypericifolia, also always on vertical cliffs, very humid, and perfectly growing now on the walls here with this beautiful bottle brush flower. You see detail of Melaleuca hypericifolia, different Melaleuca species, because you know the Hovea, because Dr. Quack told me, please, okay for native Australian species, but usually they have long grayish leaves, small flowers, growing slowly, so please add also exotic species. So finally, I did say, okay, and we have 200 native species and 150 exotic species. And he was right in the sense that now when you look at the walls, all the colorful flowers are only the exotic species because the native Australian species grow not so quickly, but the viola are flowering. Some callistemons are already flowering, so they take more time, but they establish also very well. I told you Microstrobos is perfect. So Anigosanthos. So I did put, of course, some Platycerium. This is Platycerium superbum from a photo I did take in Queensland. This is Bifurcatum. Here on the wall in front of Opera, of your Sydney Opera, Psilotum nudum, a very primitive plant that I love, and perfect for vertical gardens, you see. So this is the list of the exotic species and the list of the native species on the project. And this, I needed, of course, a nursery, and we did find Andreasen's nursery with Darren and Mademoiselle Diane, who was a poor lady. I did ask so many plants. It was a lot of work, but finally, they did very well perform the work, and I'm very happy of the result. And so you see a visit in their nursery, Andreasen's, where you see all the plants prepared to be planted. So you see the size of the different vertical gardens. So some are 42 meters. So you see the different sizes. Design, as always, of course. So installation, after we had to decide who should be in charge of making the work for the structure of the panels, after discussing about architecture, about plants, we had also to find the company, and they did choose a Jungle Phi. Fraser did choose a Jungle Phi to install, so they did do a good job for that. So you see, you had to wear, it was panels, you see elementary panels with the felt protected because they had to stay many months before being installed. So you see the structure with the metallic structure on the PVC boards. You see installation on the walls. You see work in progress from above. Installation, I did also look a little bit at what happened. And so you see this was after some months of growth. You see they staple the plants. And there is a mesh to protect in case of very strong winds to avoid that the plants or the felt or the PVC is falling on people in the street, because a vertical garden is something is supposed to enjoy the life and not to kill the people. So it's very important to think about security. So this metallic mesh is very important for that. You see it's fixed very strongly to the wall. So usual, you know all this for irrigation. It's the same for everywhere. You see during installation, the felt protected with my design on the felt. You see. So first installation, see very small plants at the beginning. You see some detail, and installed, of course, with the gondola from the top. Growing a little bit after some maybe 2 months, something like that. So you see, it was like this. When you come today, you see it's very, very different. But this was after a few months of growth. So this was a few months ago, in July, maybe. I did make some because some plants were not finally not available, some were too weak, so I did make, of course, some adjustments. You know, when you work with living things, you have always to adjust. So more recent, but now you can see it's still better than this. I was happy. It was last December. So just to show you, this is a project in Gold Coast. So I'm waiting, but it should be, this is a design. They did take my photo of my works. A challenging project in the heart of Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, for a huge conference center. And I cover 1,800 triangles of these triangles. So you know what means Riyadh, 55 or 60 degrees in summer, and also facing, it's like a roof facing the sun. So you see it's very, very challenging. And actually, you see a photo taken 2 weeks ago. The plants are very well growing. And I'm happy because I did fear a lot about the first summer. But so you see, even in desert around Riyadh, some plants are growing. So you see the list of the species I did select for these triangles. I did make the design according, you see, to the different species. So there, you see 1,800. So you see now they are growing. And the guys that take care of this. These Penicetum are already flowering, you see. And then Hypomea kerica is flowering. A project in Kuala Lumpur, a huge project because it will be about 2 kilometers long on the pillars around, around, so I should cover like this, but I wait for some news because it's about 2 kilometers long. It's you can imagine it needs time for this. A project in Japan for the Shinkansen station of Yamaguchi. Very interesting because 1 year ago we did collect plants in the mountains around Yamaguchi with all the Yamaguchi prefecture people and architects and everybody. Now they are propagated in nurseries, so it's very exciting that plants collected in last May, 15 months ago, like piece like this, and now I did go 2 weeks ago, and I see 200 of the plants because they were very, very efficient to propagate. So it was a very good project because it's very collective, involving people from the prefecture, architects, nurserymen, everybody. So it's a very friendly and very pleasant people. So you see we were on the field to collect the plants last year, and we did go again recently. So you see the plants growing, being prepared. Finally, with Jean Nouvel, another project in Kuala Lumpur, 200 meters high, with 1,000 planter boxes, and I put only climbing plants. So Michael Tay, Natural Landscape has been chosen. I did propose Natural Landscape because they did know well my work. They did work before on my walls, and they make many copies, so they know very well my work. And so I did propose Michael, and they did already install the first 8 floors. But for them, it's a big work because in Singapore, they use only 3 climbing species, the Thunbergia, Tristellatea, and the Vernonia, and mostly only Thunbergia. So me, for this project, I use 120. I'm sure to have almost 92 or 93 species. So you see, the difference between 3, mostly 1 species and 100 is very different. So I did go with them in the nurseries in Singapore, also in Kuala Lumpur. So, you know, you have to work with the people involved. Otherwise, of course, they cannot do themselves because even nurseries sometimes have the right plant, but they don't know the name. So sometimes they say, oui, I want this. And also in Singapore, for Thunbergia, you should really improve because 4 days ago I was in Kerala in South India. I did see Thunbergia grandiflora everywhere on the trees, except that the flowers are bright blue. In Singapore, you have only a pale bluish. Why? So the design of the climbing plants, all these liana for Le Nouvel. So you see this wonderful Boinia with red leaves, and this plant, incredible, would be, it opens exactly at sunset at 6:45, something like that, in 3 seconds. It's a huge morning glory at night. So from the soil, from the towers, suddenly, I hope, you'll see all these bright white things opening in few seconds all along the facade. So this is very exciting story. And this, 3 days ago, I was in India for this project. You see as it makes the design for a biennale where I am invited. And finally, in Bangkok, I did create for a new project a huge chandelier with stainless steel cables, and to a kind of answer to the man-made stainless steel cables, I use Cissus sicyoides, which is a plant which has long roots, red roots, hanging down. So you have this opposition between man-made threads and living threads under and going inside the water. So I like very much also this kind of project linking everything. So of course there will be hanging plants like this. This is a Cissus sicyoides. But of course you can imagine there is a lot of work to do this kind of project. So you see, when I was about 9 years old, I did already look above to look at plants growing high. Voilà. So it was,
All right. Truly inspiring. Thank you so much. I think we can all agree we could listen to this the entire night. Unfortunately, we have to break. We are 20 minutes after. If you'd like, we can have 5-10 minutes for some quick questions. Who has some questions? All right. Show of hands. Show of hands. Anybody? Yes? Sorry. All right, we're good? Okay, question. And who is the question for?
I'm sorry, but
At the,
Elle voulait savoir le rythme biologique des plantes, ça change avec la lumière?
Of course, for some species, flowering is directly dependent on not only intensity, but also the problem of wavelengths. For instance, many understory plants need mostly far red wavelengths around 730, while sun-loving plants need more light red around 660. So, of course, the balance of the quality of the light is one thing about flowering. The other thing is, of course, duration, because some usually plants from between the tropics are not too much sensitive to the length of the day, but for temperate plants, of course, it's also something very important. But indoor, actually, it's very globally, it's very simple. The more light the plants receive, the more usually they flower. For instance, all the columneas, the Sampolia, the Peperomia, the Rhipsalis, usually I see in Dubai, I did make a project for a Sofitel, and for the lighting, they did make a mistake. They did make too strong light. So plants, instead of receiving between 1,000 and 2,000 lux, they receive around 5,000 lux. All are flowering. It's incredible. It's totally colored. So you see, spectrum is good. It's good because they're rich in far red. So this is important. But you see, actually, the light intensity is even for understory plants, which receive only 1% of full sunlight. But you know, 1% of full sunlight is already about 2,000 lux. So it's not a 200 lux as in a car parking. So here we are maybe 50. So this is what I can say about that.
Okay. Yes, question over here.
I have a question for Michael Tay. I've listened to sort of stories out of Mexico, Singapore, England today, and Singapore has the smallest population on the smallest piece of land, but has the highest density of green roofs and green walls, it would seem. I'm wondering, how is that funded? How have you, for other countries, they go, oh, we can't possibly do that, it's much too expensive and we're not getting any of the returns. How come Singapore can do it so much?
If you attended the earlier talk by Faiza, the government is actually playing a pivotal role in all this. So number one, on a smaller scale for retrofitted buildings and so on, NParks has a certain criteria where they'll fund up to 50% of the improvement works for green walls and green roofs, but it's capped at $50,000, I believe. And then how does the government incentivize developers to want to spend money on all this stuff? Because usually a green wall and a green roof is usually non-revenue generating. Well, they incentivize it by encouraging you to go for green mark certification, and the higher your score is, the more incentives they give you in terms of giving you additional gross floor area that you can build. Yeah, that's how it works in Singapore.
All right, it's almost 6 o'clock. Going to take maybe 2-3 more questions, and then we're going to break. Question in the back here. In the back. Raise your hand. In the back. No? There you go.
Hi, this is to Patrick. We see a lot of small plants, small leaves growing. How is that you managed to bring in a large leaf planting, and how is the support taken, like large philodendrons and all those things? How is the support taken there? Could you just explain on that, please?
You mean how I mix the bigger and
small? Yeah. How the bigger plants staying intact?
But the roots are spreading in from the center in all directions, and the felt is reinforced by a material. So I have, in some cases, I have shrubs. I did live, for instance, in Chaumont-sur-Loire because it's an experimental place. I did leave some willows, and now they are 7 meters long, not falling. You know, in 1999, it was a big storm in France, and the 2 huge oak trees close to my vertical garden were falling down on me. I did not lose a single plant. So because the roots are spreading in all the directions, and to manage the combination of small herbaceous plants and big shrubby plants, of course, I consider that the shrubby plants will create shade. So under the future shrubby plants, I put much shade-loving species. So you see, it's a mix of all this, because I have always to think about long term, because as I tell you, I have many vertical gardens now which are 15 or 20 years old. So it's very important not to change the plants, because what I want to do actually is to have a kind of a natural environment where all the microorganisms are invading the fibers of the felt. So all the fungi, bacteria, very useful, are invading. So if you change the plants very often, or if you change the felt, of course it doesn't become a kind of ecosystem. So it's why it's very important to keep a very long time to have this interaction between roots and microorganisms, because you know that it's not the leaves, it's not photosynthesis which helps for purification of the air. It's the microorganisms in contact with the roots. So it's very important to keep long-term work. So in this case, the choice of the plants is, of course, the most important.
Thank you.
Okay, raise your hands. Last 2 questions. Okay, one over here, and then one more question if there is any.
Hi, my question is for Patrick, but Michael mentioned that it was quite hard to keep all the plants alive. I mean, we can all say that you're using an amazing amount of species in your installations, but how much is a balance in plant selection between what's going to survive and what's going to look good in terms of the plant structure?
To survive, you know, for the Oasis d'Aboukir planted last year, 237 species, all are still here. And for instance, in Singapore, one very well growing, the huge philodendron, but everybody was afraid because it was so huge, so we had to remove it because it was too big. Some species had problems, for instance, here. But it depends. If we have not really enough light or something like that, you can have problems. But for most of my works, actually, you change nothing because plants are growing. In my home, for instance, the last 4 meters, I cannot have access because I need a very high ladder. So in 5 years, only one time I did go at the top simply to check irrigation. So when you have no water shortage, when everything is okay, usually you have not to change. I have many walls where plants, Cartier Foundation, you did see, it's the guy in charge of maintenance. He goes just to say that he is going on place, but since 1998, so you see, since 14 years, it changes nothing.
I've lost. I was more asking if you had, because you seem to be, obviously the plants that you have selected are working well. Do you have some sort of a strategy that combats and makes site-specific designs? Because in each of your cases, the plants have had to be a little bit different in terms of the way that they handle the climate. Have you got a strategy for how you select particular plant species to work with a project?
Of course, it's a change. I think I work maybe altogether with maybe 5,000 different plant species. I cannot put the same plants in Madrid or in Paris or in San Francisco. When possible, I use the native plants. In San Francisco, for instance, I did use only plants from the San Francisco Bay Area. In Japan, I did show you native plants. It depends on, in Europe, usually I use only exotic plants because in Europe we have very few interesting things. So, of course, it's a changing everywhere in the world. Here in Sydney, I told you I did use 200 native species. I did not use them in other places in the world. So it's what is exciting, the work with 100 different climbing plant species. It will be the first botanical garden in the world dedicated only to the lianas, to climbers. It will be the first place like this in the world. So I did never, or nobody before did use 100 different climbing plant species to cover a high-rise building. So every project in Saudi Arabia, you can imagine, I don't put the same plants as in Berlin, for instance. So of course, it's exciting work. Every time, it's the only thing I do, actually, to choose the plant species and finally to make the design. And this is why it's exciting and not always the same.
Okay, merci. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been wonderful. It is 6:03, and so we're going to break, and the speakers will be available on the side if you have any additional questions. Thank you.